It's been 13 whole years since the world said goodbye to Robin Gibb. He was the singer with that special voice that gave us some of the best songs ever made in music history. When he died back in 2012, fans everywhere were really sad and upset. But his death also left behind a bunch of questions that nobody ever got clear answers to. There were whispers and rumors about secret love affairs he might have had, hidden problems he was fighting, and a whole different side of Robin that most people never got to see. For many years after he passed away, his family stayed quiet about everything. They let his beautiful music speak for itself instead of talking about private stuff. But now, finally, after all this time, his kids have decided it's time to speak up and talk. They're confirming all the gossip and rumors that just wouldn't go away, and they're telling everyone the real truth about the man behind all. Those famous songs. Robin Hugh Gibb came into this world on December 22nd, 1949. He was born at a place called the Jane Cruel Maternity Home, which was located in Douglas on the Isle of Man. He arrived just 35 short minutes before his twin brother Maurice came along. They were fraternal twins, which means they didn't look exactly alike, but they were still twins born on the same day. The two of them would grow up to become some of the most recognizable and familiar voices in all of pop music history. Robin's parents were named Hugh and Barbara Gibb, and they were both born in England. They were wonderful, loving parents who filled their home with warmth, happiness, lots of laughter, and especially a deep love for all kinds of music. Their house was always cheerful, upbeat, and jolly, with music playing and good times happening all the time. The Gibb family moved around a whole lot during Robin's early childhood years. They went back and forth between the Isle of Man and a city called Manchester in England. That's where their baby brother Andy was born and joined the family. Eventually, the whole family even moved overseas, all the way to a town called Redcliffe in Queensland, Australia, which is super far away from England. Even when they were just little kids, Robin and his brothers were pretty naughty and full of wild, restless energy that they couldn't control. There are funny stories about them causing harmless trouble everywhere they went, starting small fires just to see what would happen, playing silly pranks on people, and doing all sorts of childish stunts that kids do. But underneath all that naughtiness and mischief, there was something really special, an unmistakable spark of pure creativity that you couldn't miss. It was during these super early years of their lives that Robin, Maurice, and their older brother Barry started messing around and playing with singing harmony together. They would all sit around in their house singing the biggest hit songs from popular singers. Like the Everly Brothers and Paul Anka, they would try really hard to sing each and every note in perfect harmony with each other. Even at this young age, you could already tell they had natural, inbuilt harmonies that just came to them easily. By the year 1955, when they were still pretty young, the boys had officially and formally started their very first music group. They called themselves the Rattlesnakes, which is a pretty cool name for a band. They performed at different halls around the Manchester area for anyone who would listen. Barry would play his guitar while Robin and Maurice sang their hearts out together. Even though the band was really young and just getting started, they had something unique and special about them. A raw, genuine spirit and energy that attracted everyone who heard them and made people want to listen. When two members of their band decided to leave, the brothers didn't give up. Instead, they changed things up and reshaped themselves with a new name, Wee Johnny Hayes and the Blue Cats. Shortly after that big change, the whole family made a huge, important decision together. They decided to take a giant leap of faith and move all the way to Australia to start a completely new life there. They sailed on a big ship across the ocean in 1958. Interestingly, the very same ship they were on also had aboard a young guy named Red Simons, who was also going to become a famous musician one day, even though none of them knew it at the time. They had no idea they were all headed toward their destinies together. Australia ended up giving the Gibbs the fresh new beginning they were really hoping and looking for. Once they got there and settled in, they reformed their band once more, changing it up again. This time they picked the name that would completely transform and change their lives forever. The Bee Gees. The band's name supposedly came from the words, "Brothers Gibb? though some other people claimed that it actually came from the initials of an early radio DJ in the local area who supported them and helped them get started. In 1960, the brothers made their very first appearance on television, which was super exciting. They sang a sweet, simple, and gentle song called "Time is Passing By" on a TV show called Strictly for Moderns. Robin, with his special vibrato and incredibly soulful voice, already made him really stand out from everyone else. He already sounded totally different and more emotional than the other singers. By the middle of the 1960s, they were recording actual hit songs under a record company called Festival Records. It was becoming really clear and evident that something big and amazing was just around the corner for them. When Robin sang the lead vocals on a song called "I Don't Think It's Funny" in 1965, his voice had this emotional depth and feeling that seemed way bigger and more mature than someone his age should have. That quivering, haunting, special tone in his voice would very quickly become one of the most identifiable and recognizable sounds to an entire generation of music fans all around the world. Robin Gibb's own personal life was filled with just as much passion, drama, excitement, and heartbreak as the beautiful songs he sang and created. In 1968, right during the peak and height of the Bee Gees' first wave of fame, he got married to a woman named Molly Hullis. She was a secretary who worked for his manager, a man named Robert Stigwood. Their romance and love story started on both a high note and a tragic note at the same time. Before they even got married, the two of them were together and survived the Hither Green rail crash. This was a terrible train accident that killed dozens of people and injured many more. Going through such a scary and life-threatening experience together forged and created an unbreakable bond between the two of them. For some time after they got married, everything seemed to go their way perfectly. They had success, love, and a bright future ahead of them. They ended up having 2 children together, a son named Spencer, who was born in 1972, and a daughter named Melissa, who was born in 1974. But sadly, fame and distance and being apart started taking their toll and causing problems in their marriage. Robin's work and his music career kept him moving and traveling from place to place all the time. He was usually based and living in the United States, while Molly stayed and remained back in the UK in England. Their marriage slowly began to fall apart and break down as they lived completely separate lives in different countries. By 1980, Molly decided she'd had enough and divorced him, ending their marriage. The split and divorce turned really bitter and acrimonious, full of anger and bad feelings. Robin actually defied and disobeyed a court ruling by talking and speaking publicly about their marriage when he wasn't supposed to. Because of this, he was punished and subsequently imprisoned for 14 whole days in 1983. It was a really trying and difficult period of time that exposed and showed everyone how mercurial and unpredictable his personal life could be, even for a man who was revered and respected across the entire globe. Not too long after his divorce, Robin fell in love again with someone new. In 1985, he got married for the second time to Dwina Murphy Gibb. She was an Irish artist, an author, and a very spiritual and devout woman who was really interested in Druidry, which is an ancient spiritual practice, and something called the Brahma Kumaris movement. Together they had one son named Robin John, but everyone called him RJ for short. He was born in 1983, and he would grow up to become a musician and composer just like his father. Dwina and Robin were a very creative couple who shared artistic interests. They frequently helped and supported each other's work and projects. Together they spent their time living between different homes. They had residences in Miami, Florida, on the Isle of Man in a place called Peel, and they had their main big home called the Prebendal in Thames, Oxfordshire in England. This was a historic old house that was always full and abounding with music, art, creativity, and interesting stories. But even their union and marriage was not without its problems and issues. When Robin was about 50 years old, he started having an affair and secret relationship with a young woman named Claire Yang. She was only 25 years old and worked as their housekeeper. The affair and secret relationship went on and continued for many years. Then in 2008, something big happened. He became a father to a daughter with Claire, and they named her Snow. It was a huge scandal that made headlines in all the newspapers and magazines. But people who actually knew Robin personally claimed and said that he never lost his love for all of his children, no matter who their mother was. They said he tried and attempted to maintain harmony and peace within his entire household, despite all the drama and complicated situations. Aside from all his personal relationships and love life, Robin also had a really robust and strong political and philanthropic side to him. He was a personal friend of Tony Blair, who was a famous British politician, and he was a supporter of the Labour Party in England. He even invited Blair to come stay at his home in Miami. Robin also helped and assisted with various charities and good causes. He served as president of something called the Heritage Foundation, and he spent time lobbying and working on the Bomber Command Memorial Appeal to honor war veterans. Throughout all the ups and downs, all the love and broken hearts, all the success and scandal that filled his life, Robin never really changed deep down. He stayed the same soulful dreamer whose beautiful music shouted and spoke far more loudly and clearly than any rumor or piece of gossip could ever possibly say. Robin Gibb found himself right at the center of one of the most unexpected and shocking scandals of his entire life in the early 1980s. During 1980 and 1981, the FBI, which is like the top police force in America, allegedly started and began investigating the Bee Gees singer. This all happened following a series of really disturbing and scary telegrams that were being sent and dispatched to the lawyers and attorneys of his former wife, Molly Hullis. The messages in these telegrams seemed to promise and threaten violence. One of them even went so far as to say that he had taken out a contract. This was a term that everybody would understand and recognize to mean that someone had hired a hitman to hurt or kill someone. Another message ominously and scarily warned, "It is now a question of time," which sounded really threatening. The situation became and got quickly out of control when investigators figured out that the messages were actually traceable back to Robin himself. Gibb was right in the middle of an acrimonious and emotionally draining divorce from Molly at this time. She was his first wife and the mother of his two older children. Their marriage and union had already been really strained and damaged by many years of separation, isolation, and differences in their personalities. But these threats and scary messages pushed their battle and fight into a much darker, scarier, and more public arena where everyone could see. The FBI took the allegations and accusations very seriously, since the purported and supposed threats went across national borders and international lines. As someone who was a resident and split his time living between Britain and America, Robin's messages fell under federal control and jurisdiction once they were sent and routed. Through American means and systems, FBI agents allegedly launched an investigation to figure out and determine if the messages represented a true and real intent to injure or harm someone, or if they were merely and simply sent out in frustration during an emotional crisis and breakdown when he wasn't thinking. Clearly, the telegrams contained words and sentiments that outraged and angered both Robin's legal team and his own representatives and people who worked for him. One of the messages reportedly and supposedly stated very clearly, "I have taken out a contract," and another one suggested and hinted at vengeance and revenge for the manner and way in which he believed the divorce process was being conducted and handled. Although the messages were definitely threatening in tone and scary sounding, no criminal proceedings or charges were ever actually brought against him. The inquiry and investigation was eventually dropped and ended in a quiet fashion after just a few months went by. Friends who were close to the singer said afterwards that Robin was going through and experiencing massive amounts of emotional distress back then. His marriage had completely broken down and fallen apart. He was fighting a bitter battle over custody of his children, and he was desperately trying to control and manage his public image and persona while continuing to work and make music at the same time. These friends maintained and insisted that he was definitely not a violent person by nature. Instead, they said it was just the outburst and reaction of a man who felt trapped, helpless, and like he had no control over what was happening in his life. Nevertheless, and regardless, the scandal permanently and forever tainted Robin's image and reputation. The case and story was covered by newspapers in both Britain and America, and the story kept re-emerging and coming back up in later decades when FBI records were eventually made public for everyone to see, although Robin never spoke about or discussed the probe and investigation publicly or gave any interviews about it. It was definitely one of the most distressing and upsetting pages and chapters of his personal life. It was a time when his fame and heartache and rage all came together and collided in a manner and way that nearly destroyed and ruined all that he had worked for and accomplished in his entire life. Robin Gibb lived during the late 1960s and throughout the 1970s. A life that would be envied by many people. He had incredible riches, worldwide fame, and international acclaim as an important part of the Bee Gees. Little did anyone know or realize, however, that behind the scenes he was fighting demons and battles within himself that only a handful of people really and truly knew about. News reports and sources indicate that during his first marriage to Molly Hullis, Robin was having serious trouble with drug use and abuse, especially with stimulants like amphetamine and methadone. These medications and drugs were really prevalent and common in the music community during that time period, and numerous artists and musicians consumed and took them in order to stay and remain awake throughout really draining and exhausting tours and marathon recording sessions that went on for hours and hours. However, these drugs had a very high price tag and cost that wasn't about money. Friends of Robin spoke about and remembered times when his actions and behavior became disorganized, erratic, and unpredictable. These friends remembered and recalled that he would have periods of being super hyperactive and unable to sleep, and these would be interspersed and mixed with episodes of complete exhaustion and emotional withdrawal where he'd shut down. The stress and pressure of fame, perpetual and constant touring, and the dissolution and breakdown of his marriage only worsened and made everything even harder to deal with. Robin's thought process and way of thinking was said to become muddled and confused with paranoia at times. He started to think and believe that people around him, including his wife Molly and her lawyers among them, were conspiring and plotting against him. This increasing distrust and suspicion had created profound and deep fault lines and cracks in his personal relationships with the people he loved. Some sources and reports indicate that Robin's emotional instability and mental health problems were partly responsible for the breakdown and failure in his marriage to Molly. Fights and arguments became common and happened all the time, and communication became strained and difficult. For someone as intense, emotional, and sensitive as Robin was, these conflicts weren't merely and simply about lost love or a failed relationship. Instead, they became struggles and battles happening in his own head and mind. There were also stories and tales of Robin pulling away and isolating himself from his bandmates and family members during especially difficult and hard times. Even as the Bee Gees basked and enjoyed record-breaking success with huge hits such as Massachusetts and I Started a Joke, Robin's mental health was said to be weak, fragile, and in a bad state. The fame that had once been his dream and goal suddenly turned into an albatross, which means something that becomes a burden around your neck. He repeatedly and often expressed the feeling of being misunderstood and alone, even while surrounded by and amidst thousands of fans and all his riches and money. His substance abuse and drug use most likely amplified and made even worse these feelings of loneliness and paranoia. Stimulant drugs can enhance and increase paranoia feelings, and Robin's creative nature and artistic personality exposed and made him vulnerable to their effects and impacts even further and more intensely. Those who worked with him in the recording studio witnessed and saw firsthand how quickly his moods could change and shift. He could go from laughter and happiness one moment to suspicion and fury the very next moment, just like flipping a switch. Despite such battles and struggles with his inner demons, Robin never lost his phenomenal and amazing talent for music. His haunting vocals and lyrical skill and ability were always his best avenues and ways to express himself. Most people feel and believe that his emotional anguish and turbulent inner life were actually echoed and reflected in his strongest and most powerful songs. Although he seldom and rarely said a word about his inner demons in the public arena or gave interviews about his problems, his later interviews that came years afterwards suggested he had regrets and lessons learned from those difficult times. That era and time period left him with scars that were both earned and professional, meaning they affected both his personal life and his career, but it also shaped and molded the man he eventually turned out to be in the end. Robin Gibb's ride and journey through stardom, heartbreak, and mental despair showed and demonstrated how even the most shining and brightest stars have dark spots and shadows that very few people get to witness or see. The Bee Gees were famous and well known for their amazing harmonies and incredible songwriting prowess and talent, but beneath and underneath the sheen and polish of their beautiful sound, the Gibb brothers frequently and often fought over who should take the lead and be in charge. Robin and Barry especially and particularly had a problematic and difficult relationship that oscillated and went back and forth between brother love and artistic competition and rivalry. Their disagreements and arguments weren't just about typical sibling issues and problems. No, they were actually about deeper things like control, recognition, and their vision for the band's direction. Tension and problems developed after the huge hit and success of Massachusetts in 1967, which was one of the band's first big overseas successes in other countries. Robin had sung the lead vocals on that record, and its massive success cemented and established for him a sense of artistic identity and importance. Yet, as the Bee Gees continued their rise to fame and kept getting more popular, Barry increasingly and more took the lead on the recordings and became the main voice. Years later on, Barry conceded and admitted that following Massachusetts, Robin never really felt that anyone else should sing lead after that song did so well. That sense and feeling of being pushed aside and overshadowed would plague and haunt their professional association and working relationship for many years to come after that. By the late 1960s, the conflicts and fights had become much more serious and intense. Robin felt strongly that his voice was integral and essential to the Bee Gees' emotional richness and depth, while Barry, with his sweeter pop voice that was more radio-friendly, emerged and came out as the group's commercial face and main frontman. When an album called Odessa appeared and was released in 1969, the creative differences between the brothers erupted and exploded. Robin sought and wanted to make the band play and perform more artistic, dramatic songs that were deeper, while Barry and their manager were headed and moving toward more radio-oriented pop music that would sell better. Robin's departure from the group in that same year, splitting and breaking away from the family temporarily as well, shocked and surprised listeners and fans everywhere, and it fractured and broke apart the family. Robin's solo success, such as the success of his song Saved by the Bell, demonstrated and showed that he was definitely able to thrive and succeed on his own without his brothers. But the breakup and split did not last long at all. The brothers eventually reunited and came back together in 1970 and went back to the studio to record together again. They understood and realized that their real power and strength lay in being together as a group. Still, even after getting back together, old resentment and bitter feelings still festered and bubbled beneath the surface. Even during their subsequent and later disco phase, when the Bee Gees dominated and ruled the charts with massive hits like Staying Alive and Night Fever, there was still the ongoing creative tug-of-war and power struggle happening between them. Robin was frequently and often overshadowed and pushed to the side by the increasingly prominent and important role of Barry as the group's frontman and lead producer. He yearned and longed for his distinctive voice and his more somber and serious writing style to be given center stage and more attention. Maurice, their brother who was always the mediator and peacemaker, attempted and tried to level the playing field and balance things out between his two brothers. But the disputes and arguments occasionally and sometimes became acrimonious and really bitter and angry. Interviews. at the time suggested and hinted that there were times when Robin threatened to leave the group again if things didn't change. But the brothers had a strong bond and connection which fame and success could not possibly destroy or break. They always somehow managed to come back to each other and work things out. Even though wounds and hurt feelings lingered and stayed with them, Robin eventually conceded and admitted that the competition between them was actually one of the reasons their music was so intense and powerful. The tension and pulling apart between Barry's domination and Robin's passion generated and created the spark and energy that characterized and defined the Bee Gees' sound. It's evidence and proof that at times even discord and conflict may form and create ageless harmony and timeless music. When Maurice Gibb died and passed away in 2003, the Bee Gees' legacy and memory fell into difficult and sometimes awkward hands. It was now particularly on the shoulders of the still-living brothers, Barry and Robin. The death and loss of their twin brother devastated and crushed Robin emotionally, and Barry, as the eldest and oldest brother, attempted and tried to balance his sorrow and grief with a need and responsibility to continue promoting and keeping alive the Bee Gees' name and reputation. But within a short time after Maurice's death, tensions and problems cropped up and appeared regarding how his memory should be preserved and honored. What began and started as a bid and attempt to make a tribute album to honor Maurice became a public feud and fight that exposed and revealed deep rifts and divisions in the family. Maurice's widow and wife Yvonne, along with her family members, were accused by Barry Gibb of muscling him out and pushing him away from a tribute album project that had been in the works and being planned. He felt strongly that the album was being planned and put together without proper motives and good intentions, that it was more to make money and profit than as a loving tribute to remember Maurice. Barry took it so far as to declare and state publicly that the album was profiting and making money from Maurice's image and the Bee Gees' name, which deeply hurt and upset him emotionally. He spoke out publicly and gave interviews, voicing his disappointment and expressing that a project that was intended and meant to honor Maurice's life had become, in his view and opinion, an exploitation, which means taking advantage of someone for money. Robin was caught in the middle of all this mess and drama. He was extremely close with Maurice as his twin brother, and he desired and wanted to preserve and protect his memory through music. Rumors and reports stated that Robin continued working on numerous projects that were related to the Bee Gees while Barry stepped away and took a break for a while out of anger over the way Maurice's legacy was being treated and handled. The brothers' relationship was said to have become strained and damaged, with different ideas and opinions about how to continue and carry on the Bee Gees' name and reputation into the future. The feud and fight wasn't simply about one album or one project. It was actually about more profound and deeper feelings involving loss, control, and what legacy and memory really meant to each of them. Barry had always shielded and protected the Bee Gees' image and artistic path throughout his life, and Robin had a reputation for having a strong personal and artistic identification with their work and music. When individual loss and grief came into play and got mixed in, those distinctions and differences intensified and got even stronger, and then it all played out in public where everyone could see. Barry's remarks and public comments caused a media frenzy and got lots of attention. Fans were shocked and couldn't believe what they were seeing. The Gibb family, who had been famous for decades of musical harmony and working together perfectly, were now at odds with each other and fighting over something as intimate and personal as Maurice's memory. Over time, as months and years passed, time mollified and softened the fury and anger. But the wounds and hurt feelings never fully healed or went away completely. The incident and event was one of the very few times that the Gibb family squabbles and arguments involving Barry and Robin entered the public sphere and became visible for everyone to see. Later interviews years after this happened had Barry reminiscing and looking back sadly about that time period. He admitted and acknowledged how hard and difficult it was for them all to cope with bereavement and grief under the glare and bright lights of the world's spotlight and attention. While the controversy over the tribute album dissipated and faded away over time, it left behind a sore memory and reminder of how fame, family, and loss can all be entangled and twisted together in complicated ways, even between brothers who dominated and ruled the charts at one time and were so close. The last few years of Robin Gibb's life were definitely not easy at all, yet they were filled with immense courage and bravery. The artist who used to touch and move millions of people with his angelic voice was now fighting a completely different battle, one of survival and staying alive, one that stripped away all the glamour of the stage lights and the deafening applause from crowds, and revealed and showed the man behind the legend and fame. What has made Robin's tale and story unforgettable and memorable was not merely the disease and sickness he suffered from, but the indomitable spirit and strength with which he battled it and fought back. It was in 2011 that Robin first discovered and found out he had colon cancer, which is cancer in the intestines. Doctors subsequently and later found that the cancer had spread to his liver as well, which was really bad news. People around him and those close to him said that despite being told of the diagnosis and hearing the terrible news, he never lost his optimism and positive attitude. He kept on giving interviews to reporters and was assuring and promising fans that he would get better soon and recover. Even though he looked frail and weak and showed visible signs of weight loss that anyone could see, the words of Robin still had that same unobtrusive strength and quiet power as his music always did. He was convinced and believed strongly that he would beat the disease and overcome it. And in several ways, that conviction and strong belief kept him going and alive for much longer than anyone had ever anticipated or expected. During his illness and time being sick, Robin had to go through several surgeries and operations, plus chemotherapy treatments that made him feel even worse. Each successive treatment visibly and clearly weakened him more and more. But even while undergoing treatment and feeling terrible, he immersed and threw himself into his last musical passion project, which was called the Titanic Requiem. He composed and wrote this piece together with his son R.J. Gibb, and the symphonic piece was written specifically to honor the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic ship. Robin perceived and saw it not just as a remembrance for history, but as a reflection and representation of perseverance and human sentiment and emotion, something that reflected and mirrored his own personal battle with cancer. His colleagues and people who worked with him said that he absolutely refused to cease writing and creating music even while being attached to hospital drips and medical equipment. He would jot down notes and tunes from his hospital bed, never stopping his creative process. As the illness took its course and progressed, Robin's state and condition weakened significantly. In April 2012, something really scary happened. He fell into a coma when he caught pneumonia on top of his cancer. Accounts and reports at the time indicated that doctors had basically given up hope and didn't think he would survive. And the family congregated and gathered at his bedside to bid their final farewells and say goodbye. But then, in a dramatic and amazing twist of fate and turn of events, Robin woke up just days later, which shocked everyone. Dwina, his wife, remembered and recalled playing music from the Titanic Requiem in the hospital room while he was unconscious. And as the orchestra's sound wafted and floated about in the air, Robin's fingers started to stir and move slightly. A minute later, he actually opened his eyes and smiled at everyone around him. RJ, his son, termed and called it a miracle. He said it was his father's sheer willpower and determination that revived him and brought him back, if just for a short moment. In those few precious days following his awakening and coming back to consciousness, Robin was once again revealing and showing glimpses of his former self and who he used to be. He attempted to speak and talk, softly hummed along with music that was playing, and even spoke about and discussed getting back on stage to perform again someday. He was still referring to the future, Dwina told reporters afterwards, remembering those bittersweet days. He kept saying he wanted to return to the stage and perform for his fans. To his family, these were precious and invaluable moments that confirmed that while his body was failing and giving up, his mind and spirit remained full of music and creativity and hope. Unfortunately and sadly, His condition rapidly deteriorated and got much worse very quickly. Robin's kidneys and liver both failed and stopped working, and the disease was just too much to overcome and too powerful to defeat. On May 20th, 2012, with Dwina, RJ, and other dear loved ones by his side surrounding him, Robin died and passed away at age 62 in his London home. Dwina reports and says that he met his last hours with calm and peace, smiling quietly, with his hand held in hers. He wasn't afraid, she added, wanting people to know. He thought and believed that this life was merely one step on a much larger path and journey. In his final moments on earth, Robin was the same man everybody knew and loved, soft, contemplative, and thoughtful, and boundlessly creative until the very end. RJ recalled and remembered later that as his father breathed his last breath and passed away, there was tranquility and peace in the room. He was smiling, he whispered, remembering that final moment. For a man who had lived his entire life pursuing harmony and beautiful sound, maybe that was the most appropriate and fitting finale and ending. A silent, lovely note that resonates and echoes long after the music ends and fades away. Robin Gibb's tale and story did not stop with sickness and illness. It stopped and ended with love, religion, and faith, and the unbreakable heart and spirit of an artist who would not and refused to let pain silence him or stop his creativity. Even today, right now, his family says they still feel his presence through his songs and music, a voice that continues to tell the world that hope is greater and more powerful than death itself. Following Robin Gibb's death in 2012, the world lost one of the greatest voices in all of pop music history. But for his family members, it was a very personal tragedy and devastating loss that hit them hard. In the years since he passed away, his widow Dwina and his son Robin John, who everyone knows as RJ, gradually and slowly started speaking out and talking about what living with Robin was actually like on a daily basis. His last moments, his relationships with people, and how they have managed to keep his legacy and memory going strong. Their testimony and words were a glimpse and window of the man behind the glory and fame, and it was full of warmth, forgiveness, and closure that people needed to hear. One of the earliest revelations and pieces of information to catch attention and surprise people was Dwina Gibb being frank and completely honest about her marriage to Robin. She clarified and explained that she and Robin shared what's called an open relationship, which was something that very few fans were aware of or knew about during his lifetime while he was still alive. When reports and news of Robin's affair with their housekeeper, a woman named Claire Yang, made the headlines and became public knowledge, and when their daughter Snow was born in 2008, Dwina stated and said clearly that it wasn't the shock or surprise that people had imagined it would be. She defined and described herself as not a jealous person, and went on to say that both Claire and baby Snow had both been taken care of and provided for. Her voice and tone was placid and calm, even sympathetic and understanding, revealing and showing a family who had opted and chosen for discretion and privacy over scandal and public drama. Following Robin's death, his will and legal documents were made public so everyone could see them. It showed and revealed that he left his estimated $26 million estate, which is a lot of money, primarily to Dwina and 3 of his children. Spencer, Melissa, and RJ Snow, his youngest daughter, was not included in the primary beneficiaries and main list of people getting the inheritance. However, she was reportedly provided for privately in other ways, according to what Dwina and the media said and reported. Instead of challenging this openly and making a big fuss or taking it to court, the family dealt with it discreetly and quietly. They chose to keep the peace and remain united as a family instead of fighting. RJ Gibb, on the other hand, talked and spoke about his dad from a very personal and intimate perspective that gave people insight. In a series of interviews he gave, he recalled and remembered his dad's last days and final hours when he held Robin's head gently, grasped his hand tightly, and whispered softly, "We love you," as his father passed away and took his final breaths. He recalled and described it as heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time. A scene that was full of love and acceptance and peace. RJ also told and shared how even towards the very end of his life when he was so sick, Robin was still discussing music and talking about songs and melodies, showing just how much he lived for his work and how important it was.